Here is the translation into ***, standard American English, ***. Preserving tone, depth, and psychological nuance. There is a question that almost no one asks with enough honesty. If you want something so badly, why hasn't it happened yet? Have you noticed that some people seem to manifest what they want naturally, while others repeat affirmations, visualize, set goals, plan, study, put in effort, and yet keep spinning in the same place? Maybe you felt this. You decide you want to prosper. You organize your finances. You start a project. You make plans. You imagine your bank account growing. For a few days, you feel motivated, confident, even inspired. But then something starts to happen. A subtle doubt, a quiet fear, a feeling that this isn't really for you. You keep trying, but there's an inner tension you can't explain. It's as if, no matter how much you push forward, something inside you pulls you back. And then the mind starts creating justifications. Maybe I'm not doing it right. Maybe I need more technique. Maybe I'm not vibrating high enough. Maybe the law of attraction only works for some people. But what if the problem isn't the desire? What if the problem is the identity that sustains, or fails to sustain, that desire? The uncomfortable truth is this: the universe does not respond to what you want. And when I say the universe, understand it as your dominant psychological pattern. Life tends to reflect what you consistently sustain, your choices, limits, tolerances, and decisions. It responds to who you are, not to what you say you want, but to what you emotionally believe, repeatedly, automatically, and invisibly. Conscious desires fail because they are superficial compared to the force of deep beliefs. You can repeat "I am prosperous" 100 times a day, but if, deep down, you feel small, insecure, inadequate, or unworthy, it is that identity that shapes your choices. This isn't a lack of positive thinking, it's internal misalignment. And today you're going to understand why this happens. You'll realize that there may be a part of you sabotaging what you say you want, not out of malice, not out of incapacity, but out of protection. And when you understand this, something changes. Because real transformation doesn't begin when you try to force a desire into reality. It begins when you have the courage to discover who you believe you are beneath the desire. Let's talk about something that is rarely explored in depth. You don't manifest from thought, you manifest from identity. And identity is built long before you decide what you want. From an early age, you learned not just through words, but through experiences, what was safe to desire. Maybe you saw people struggle for money and lose their peace. Maybe you heard phrases like, "Money is hard. Those who earn a lot pay a price. It's better to have little and be honest." That's not for people like us. You may have consciously rejected these ideas. But the subconscious doesn't only record what you agree with, it records what you feel. If, in your childhood or adolescence, prosperity was associated with conflict, tension, judgment, or rejection, your emotional system may have created an invisible association. Growth is dangerous. And when you decide, as an adult, that you want to grow, that emotional memory activates. This is where the shadow comes in. The shadow isn't dark in a negative sense. It is simply the collection of parts of you that were repressed, denied, or deemed unacceptable throughout life. There is a shadow of scarcity, but there is also a shadow of prosperity. You may have repressed your ambition so you wouldn't seem arrogant. You may have hidden your desire for abundance so you wouldn't seem materialistic. You may have dimmed your own light to continue belonging to your group. And when you repress something, it doesn't disappear. It goes into the shadow. The problem is that the shadow continues to influence your decisions. You say you want more money, but in the shadow, there is guilt about wanting more. You say you want recognition, but in the shadow, there is fear of being criticized. You say you want financial freedom, but in the shadow, there is attachment to the identity of the struggler. That identity is extremely powerful because it has become familiar, and the subconscious prioritizes what is familiar, even if it's limiting, over what is expansive. Conscious desires fail because they cannot pass through the gravitational field of the old identity. Jung would call this a complex. A complex is an emotional nucleus loaded with memories, experiences, and sensations that gains autonomy within the psyche. You believe you are choosing rationally, but in certain moments, the complex chooses for you. It activates fear, activates guilt, activates self-protection, And all of this happens before your conscious mind even notices. You may want to earn 10 times more. But if, deep down, you see yourself as someone who has always had to struggle, you'll keep creating scenarios where you must struggle. You may desire stability, but if, emotionally, you associate stability with boredom or loss of intensity, you'll unconsciously generate instability. Notice the depth of this. It's not the universe denying you. It's internal coherence, preserving who you believe you are. And as long as you don't question that identity, you'll keep trying to change external results with superficial tools. Affirmations don't work when they contradict self-image. Visualizations don't hold when the body feels fear toward what's being imagined. The subconscious doesn't respond to mechanical repetition. It responds to emotional repetition. If, for years, you've repeated emotions of insufficiency, comparison, insecurity, or fear of judgment that has become your real vibrational pattern, and you can't create a different reality if you remain emotionally loyal to an old version of yourself. That loyalty is invisible, but it is extremely strong, because abandoning an old identity requires passing through a void. And the void is frightening. That's why so many people start changes and then pull back. Not because they don't want the result, but because they aren't prepared to let go of the version of themselves that sustained the old reality. True reprogramming doesn't begin when you try to convince yourself of something new. It begins when you perceive the internal conflict. Imagine that inside you there are two forces, the force of expansion and the force of preservation. Expansion wants to grow, prosper, experience, live in abundance. Preservation wants to keep you safe within what is already known. If, in your history, growth meant pain or exclusion, preservation becomes dominant. And every time you try to move forward, it activates subtle mechanisms: procrastination, excessive doubt, harsh self-criticism, incoherent financial decisions, energy-draining relationships, projects started and never finished. None of this is random. Maybe you've lived this. You receive an opportunity and delay responding. You earn extra money, and that same day an unexpected expense appears. You start a project with enthusiasm, and when it begins to work, you lose energy. This isn't bad luck. It's internal coherence, trying to preserve an old identity. It's self-protection. The subconscious mind constantly asks, is this new reality safe for who I am? If the emotional answer is no, you freeze and notice something important. It's not just the mind that freezes, it's the body. If you imagine prosperity and feel tightness in your chest, if you think about growth and feel anxiety in your stomach, if you visualize success and silent guilt arises, that's not lack of faith. It's an old emotional association saying, this isn't safe for who I am. So the path is not to force expansion, it's to update identity. And that begins with awareness. When you recognize, there is fear of growing within me. There is guilt around prospering within me. There is attachment to the scarcity narrative within me. You begin to separate who you are from who you learn to be. That distinction is powerful because identity is not essence. Identity is construction, and what was constructed can be reconstructed, but not through denial of the shadow, through integration. Integrating the shadow means accepting that there are parts of you that fear prosperity, that fear responsibility, that fear being seen. Instead of fighting these parts, you begin to listen to them. You ask silently, what are you trying to protect? Maybe the answer is, I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of losing people's love. I'm afraid of failing on a larger scale. When this is acknowledged, the tension decreases. Because now, there is no internal war. There is dialogue. And it's in this space that reprogramming begins. You start creating new, emotional associations. Prosperity stops being a threat. It becomes safe expansion. Money stops representing conflict. It becomes freedom and contribution. Visibility stops being risk. It becomes authentic expression. And as these new associations are emotionally repeated, not just mentally, your self-image begins to change. You start to see yourself as someone capable of sustaining abundance. And that changes everything. Because when self-image changes, behavior changes naturally. You begin making more aligned decisions. You set clearer boundaries. You invest in yourself without guilt. You act with greater firmness. Not because you're forcing it, but because now it's coherent with who you believe you are. That's when desires stop failing. Do something now. Close your eyes for a few seconds. Imagine that you already have exactly the prosperity you desire. Now observe. What is the first emotion that arises? Peace, fear, guilt, pressure? That emotion is the doorway to your shadow. Don't ignore it. Listen to it. Because desires stop being isolated wishes. They become extensions of your identity. And when identity and desire walk together, reality begins to reorganize. Not by magic, but by systemic coherence. If something within you realized that the real block was never lack of effort, but internal conflict, comment just one word, coherence, as a symbol that you choose to align who you are with what you want to live. Now imagine a life where you don't have to fight yourself. You wake up with a sense of internal stability, not euphoria, solidity. You know who you are, and you know what you are capable of sustaining. The money that comes in doesn't generate anxiety. It finds an internal space prepared to receive it. You don't feel guilt for growing. You don't feel the need to justify prospering. You don't dim your light to maintain connections. You attract relationships compatible with your expansion. Your financial decisions stop being impulsive. They become strategic and conscious. You don't accept less than what you know you can sustain, because your self-image has been updated, and that update changes your tolerance threshold. You begin noticing opportunities you once ignored. You position yourself more clearly. You say no to what perpetuates scarcity. There is a different kind of calm, a confidence that doesn't depend on external validation. You don't need to repeat affirmations to believe. You feel it, and when you feel it, you act differently. And when you act differently, results inevitably change. Prosperity stops being distant. It becomes a natural consequence of an aligned identity. You realize the universe was never against you. It was only reflecting who you believed you were. And now that belief has changed, the reflection changes too. Not because you forced it, but because you transformed. If you feel this is the moment to go beyond surface-level understanding and truly rebuild your identity from the roots, there is a next step. The ebook available in the description is not just content. It's a structured deepening for those who have decided to revise subconscious beliefs, dissolve scarcity patterns, and create a self-image compatible with conscious prosperity. There you'll find a journey that leads to mental clarity, emotional alignment, and the construction of new internal meanings. It's not about repeating positive phrases. It's about identifying the invisible structures that sustain your current reality and replacing them with more solid foundations. When you update your identity, habits reorganize. When habits reorganize, results transform. And when results transform coherently, prosperity stops being an expectation. It becomes a state. If this video opened an internal door, the ebook is the natural continuation of that path, not as a miraculous promise, but as a conscious process. Because in the end, conscious desires only fail while identity remains old. When identity and desire become one, reality has no other option but to follow. This does not replace therapy or promise instant results. It is a process of deep awareness and internal reconstruction.